You have to work for me. That's the only way you will pay off what your parents owe the organization.
But I don't want to.
The night soullight rain began to fall on Los Angeles. Nicole Collins was counting her last $20. She spread the bill flat on the kitchen counter of her tiny Koreatown apartment, smoothing the wrinkles with her thumb as though the gesture might multiply it. Outside, the street lamps bled orange light through the rain-slicked window, casting long shadows across the walls she decorated with framed photographs. Her mother laughing at a barbecue, her little brother Ethan in his high school graduation cap, herself at 22 smiling in front of the bakery she dreamed of owning someday. That dream now had a price tag of $180,000. It had started simply enough. Her mother, Grace Collins, had borrowed money 5 years ago when the cancer diagnosis came and the insurance company sent its regrets. Small loans at first from places that didn't ask questions. Then bigger ones from people who most certainly did. The interest compounded the way grief compounded, silently, relentlessly, until it became a weight no one person could carry alone. Grace died 18 months ago. But the debt didn't. Nicole had taken it on herself. She wasn't going to let the men who called at 3 in the morning talk about her mother's name the way they did. Like it was collateral, like Grace Collins had been nothing but a ledger entry. So Nicole signed her name on the line, and in doing so, stepped into a world she didn't fully understand. The men her mother had borrowed from were not loan sharks in the traditional sense. They were subsidiaries of something much larger. Something that wore 1,000 faces across Los Angeles. Restaurants, import businesses, construction companies, all of them bleeding quietly into the veins of a Korean criminal organization known only in whispered circles as Hukseja. The Black Lions. And the Black Lions had recently been bought out. Nicole learned this on a Tuesday, when a man in a gray suit arrived at her waitressing job and slid a business card across the counter between her coffee refills. The card was matte black. Embossed in silver, it read only, Kang Jinho. Below it, a single line, "We need to discuss what you owe." She turned it over. Nothing on the back. "Who is Kang Jinho?" she asked the man in the gray suit. He smiled the way people smiled when the answer was dangerous. "Someone who now owns your debt, Miss Collins. He would like to meet you. Friday. 8 o'clock. He slid a second card across the counter, an address in the Wilshire corridor. It would be unwise to decline. She went home that night and typed the name into her phone. The internet gave her fragments. A photograph from a Seoul business magazine, 3 years old. A man in his early 30s standing at the edge of a rooftop garden in a black suit, his expression somewhere between bored and lethal. Sharp jaw. Dark eyes that held the camera with a kind of absolute authority. The caption beneath identified him as the CEO of Kang International Holdings, a private investment conglomerate. She scrolled deeper and found less. The kind of less that meant someone paid to make things disappear. One forum post, since deleted but cached by a third-party archive, called him the most dangerous man in the Korean underworld who has never once been photographed committing a crime. Nicole stared at that line for a long time. Then she called her best friend Imani. "Girl," Imani said after listening to all of it, "you need to run." "I can't run," Nicole said quietly. "Where would I go?" Neither of them had an answer for that. The restaurant was called Chongsam, a private establishment on the 14th floor of a building that had no signage on the street level. Nicole arrived in the best dress she owned, a deep burgundy wrap dress her mother had bought her for her 25th birthday. She told herself she dressed well as armor, not as vulnerability. The maitre d' was expecting her. She was taken not to the main dining floor but through a corridor and into a private room framed in dark wood and low amber lighting, where a single table was set for two. He was already seated. Kang Jinho in person was nothing like the photograph and entirely like it. The photograph had captured his severity, the clean, angular face, the dark eyes, the stillness of a man who never moved unnecessarily. What it hadn't captured was the way he filled a room without standing up. He sat with one arm resting on the table, a glass of whiskey near his hand, watching her cross the room with an expression that revealed absolutely nothing. He was younger looking in person. 33 she would later learn. But his eyes were old in a way that had nothing to do with age. He gestured to the chair across from him. She sat. For a moment, neither of them spoke. He looked at her the way she imagined people looked at documents they were deciding whether to sign. "Nicole Collins," he said finally. His English was perfect, accented in the musical, precise way of someone who had learned the language from very good teachers and then refined it through years of use. "Your mother borrowed $212,000 across 7 separate agreements over 4 years. 180,000 after payments," she said calmly. "My mother made payments. Something moved in his eyes. Brief. Recalibrating. Yes, he said. After payments. 180,000. What do you want? She asked. Direct. She had promised herself she would be direct. He considered her for a moment. I want to offer you an arrangement. I'm listening. My company recently acquired the Huxeja portfolio in Los Angeles. Your debt is among those assets. I have no interest in traditional collection methods. He paused. I want you to work for me. Nicole went very still. Work for you how? As my assistant. Personal. You will attend functions with me, manage elements of my schedule, and maintain a presence at my side for professional engagements. He picked up his whiskey glass and turned it once, slowly. In return, your debt is reduced by $20,000 for every month of service. In 9 months, it will be cleared entirely. She stared at him. That's not a job. That's ownership. His jaw tightened slightly, the first visible emotion. It is a contract. There is a difference. I'd like to hear you explain the difference. He looked at her for a long moment. Something shifted behind his eyes, not quite surprise but something adjacent to it. As though he had expected her to be more afraid and found her refusal of fear mildly interesting. The difference, he said quietly, is that you may leave at any time. You will not be harmed. You will not be coerced beyond the terms of this agreement. He set the glass down. But if you leave, the debt remains. And the people I purchased this portfolio from had less reasonable methods of collection. She understood what he wasn't saying. The debt had existed before him. It would exist after him if she walked. And the people circling it were not Jinho's refined kind of dangerous. She looked at him across the table, this man with his old eyes and his black card and his empire of beautiful, terrible secrets, and she thought about her mother and Ethan and the photograph on her kitchen wall. 9 months, she said. 9 months, he confirmed. I want the terms in writing. This time the thing that moved in his eyes was unmistakably respect. The one that circulated through Jinho's professional world was that Nicole Collins was his personal assistant, hired from a prestigious staffing agency. She was introduced this way at 3 separate business dinners in her first 2 weeks, and she played the role with a composure that she privately credited to years of waiting tables and pretending customer rudeness didn't sting. She was good at performing calm. What she hadn't expected was that the job was real. Jinho's schedule was legitimately brutal. Calls with Seoul at 6 in the morning, meetings stacked through the afternoon, evening functions that stretched past midnight. He communicated in a language of efficiency so compressed it took her a week to decode it. A look meant handle this, a single finger raised meant 1 minute, and silence, long, unhurried silence, meant he was thinking and she was not to interrupt under any circumstances. She learned him the way you learned a foreign language. By immersion. By mistake. By the occasional startling moment of clarity. What she also hadn't expected was the apartment. You'll need to relocate, he informed her at the end of the first week. In the same tone he might discuss restructuring a quarterly report. There's a residence in the building. Secure. It will be easier logistically. She'd stood in the doorway of what turned out to be a 2-bedroom apartment on the 22nd floor with a panoramic view of the city, fully furnished in a style that was spare and beautiful and nothing like anything she'd ever lived in, and she said, I'm not a prisoner. No, he said from where he stood in the middle of the living room looking out at the skyline. You're a person whose apartment building has a broken lock on the front entrance and no security cameras. I looked. She opened her mouth. Closed it. This is safer, he said simply and left. She stood in the silence of the apartment, in the glow of Los Angeles laid out below her like a circuit board, and tried to name the feeling gathering in her chest. She couldn't quite. So she unpacked. They established a rhythm. She arrived at his office on the 25th floor each morning at 7. He was always already there. He drank black coffee and worked in near silence, and she learned that his silence was not coldness, it was concentration. The way a surgeon's stillness was not indifference but precision. She began to notice things. The way he paused before difficult decisions, not from uncertainty but from a habit of respect for consequence. The way he always remembered details. She mentioned once in passing that she didn't eat shellfish, and from that day forward every catered meeting had an alternative prepared for her without her asking. The way he looked at the photograph on her desk, the one of her and Ethan at the graduation, with an expression she couldn't name, brief and unguarded, before his face smoothed back into its habitual composure. She also noticed the other things. The men who flanked him at certain meetings, whose suits fit in ways that accommodated weapons. The conversations that happened behind closed doors and went silent when she passed. The manila folders that appeared and disappeared from his desk without ever entering the filing system. The phone he kept separate from his business phone, matte black like his card, never set down, never charged in front of her. He was two things simultaneously. She understood this from the beginning. The question was which one was real, and she was beginning to suspect the answer was both. One evening in their third week, she was working late, cross-referencing flight manifests for a trip to New York, when she heard raised voices from the inner office. She didn't intend to hear. The acoustics of the building were strange at night, sound traveling differently in the silence. But she heard enough. A man's voice in rapid Korean. Angry. A name repeated, Park Sung-jae. And Jinho's voice, low and final like a door closing, not yet. The other man said something short and sharp. Jinho replied in a tone she had never heard from him before, cold and absolute, stripped of even the performance of civility. The inner office went quiet. She was staring at her screen, very deliberately, when Jinho emerged. He paused when he saw her still there, and something crossed his face, not anger but an assessment. You heard that, he said. I don't speak Korean, she said, which was true and not quite an answer. He studied her for a moment. Then he did something unexpected. He sat down in the chair across from her desk, not his chair, her chair, and was quiet for a moment, looking at the dark window and the rain beginning on the glass. Park Sung-jae, he said finally, is the reason I'm in Los Angeles. She waited. He was my partner 10 years ago when I was building the foundation of what Kong International became. We built it together. He paused. And then he made a choice that cost someone close to me everything. She didn't ask. She understood he was giving her what he chose to give, not because she pressed, and pressing would close the door. I've been dismantling his network for 2 years, he said. Piece by piece. The Hookseja portfolio was his. Taking it was. He seemed to search for the word. Strategic. Nicole was quiet for a moment. Then softly, and the debt you bought. What? Was that strategic too? He turned from the window and looked at her directly. In the low light of the office, with rain on the glass behind him and the city burning below, he looked suddenly less like an empire and more like a person. Your mother borrowed from Park's men, he said. Yes. I knew her name was in the portfolio. The air went out of the room. You bought me, she said, keeping her voice very steady, as a piece of a game against him. I bought your debt, he said, to remove you from his reach. Park uses outstanding debts as leverage. He stopped. As tools. I have seen what his collection methods look like. I wasn't willing to leave your name in his hands. She stared at him. You could have just paid it off. Released it. A sudden release would have drawn attention. Would have told Park that something, or someone, in that portfolio mattered to me. He held her gaze. It was safer for you this way. As a transaction. Unremarkable. The silence stretched. So I'm not revenge, she said slowly. I'm protection. You were supposed to be both, he said quietly. You have become, I find, more complicated than I anticipated. She didn't know what to do with that sentence. She filed it away in the part of herself she was trying not to examine too closely, and went back to the flight manifest with hands that were very nearly steady. New York happened in April, when the magnolias were out and the city smelled like ambition and rain. They stayed in a hotel that charged more per night than Nicole earned in a month waitressing. She had her own room, which Jinho had clearly specified in the reservation, and she noted this with a feeling she couldn't entirely identify. The first night there was a dinner at a private club in Midtown, 12 people all orbiting money the way planets orbited mass. Nicole wore a black dress she'd bought that afternoon with the clothing allowance that had appeared in her contract without discussion, and she felt Jinho's gaze cross her when she emerged from the elevator, a look that he shut down so quickly she might have imagined it. She hadn't imagined it. At dinner she was seated beside him, as always. She had learned to read the architecture of these evenings. Who was being assessed, what information was being gathered, which smiles were weaponized. Tonight there was a man across the table, 50s, silver-haired, who kept looking at Jinho with the specific quality of someone trying to determine how afraid to be. His name was Lev Morozov. Russian finance. And he was, Nicole would understand only later, connected to Park Sung-jae. At a lull in the conversation, Morozov looked at Nicole with the measuring, proprietary way that certain men had and said, "And how long have you and Jinho been together?" Nicole opened her mouth to give the standard correction, "I'm his assistant," and felt Jinho's hand close over hers on the table. Gently. Deliberately. She turned to look at him. His expression was neutral, but his eyes were asking her something. She turned back to Morozov and smiled. Long enough, she said. Jinho's thumb moved once across her knuckles, so briefly she might have imagined it, and then his hand withdrew. The rest of the dinner she was acutely, almost painfully aware of the 6 inches of air between them. It was later that night in the hotel corridor that it started to come apart. They were walking back to their rooms after the dinner, the corridor quiet at 1 in the morning, and Nicole said, because she had been thinking about it through 3 courses and a dessert she hadn't touched, "Why did you do that?" "At dinner." He glanced at her. "Morozov is connected to Park. Park will now hear that I am, that there is someone I keep close." He paused. It was useful. She stopped walking. He took 2 more steps before he realized she wasn't beside him and turned. "Useful," she repeated. Her voice was very even. "I'm useful." Something moved in his face. "Nicole?" "Don't," she said not loudly. "Don't use my name like that right now, like you're managing something." He was quiet. He stood in the corridor light, this man who controlled rooms and organizations and the chessboard movements of a 2-year revenge operation, and he looked at her with an expression she hadn't seen before. Undefended. Almost lost. "I didn't take your hand because it was useful," he said. The words came out quiet and clearly cost him something. "Then why did you?" she said. Not a question. A rope thrown into the dark between them. He crossed the distance between them in 3 steps, and she thought for a startled second that he was going to. He stopped in front of her. Close. Close enough that she could see the particular darkness of his eyes, could see the muscle that tightened in his jaw. "Because you were sitting there," he said very quietly, "in that room full of people who belong to a world that takes things apart, and you were." He seemed to search for the word and find it insufficient. "Luminous. And I could not sit beside you and not." He stopped. The corridor was very quiet. Nicole's heart was doing something unsteady. "Jinho," she said softly. He moved first. Or she did. Later she would never be entirely sure. His mouth found hers in the corridor of a midtown hotel at 1 in the morning, and the kiss was not tentative, it was the kind of kiss that had been building for weeks in the compression of shared silences and careful distances, a dam finally surrendering. His hand came up to her jaw, tilting her face, and she pressed forward into him and felt his sharp intake of breath like a small victory. When they broke apart, both breathing unsteadily, he rested his forehead against hers. "This was not in the contract," he said. "No," she agreed. "I don't know what to do with you," he said, with a raw honesty she suspected very few people had ever heard from him. "I know," she said. "I don't know what to do with you either." They stood there a moment longer in the warm corridor with the city burning below the windows and everything between them reshaping itself. Then he stepped back, gathered himself. His hand lingered against her cheek for 1 beat longer. "Good night, Nicole," he said. "Good night," she said. She went into her room and stood against the closed door in the dark and pressed her hand over her mouth and felt, in equal measure, terrified and more alive than she had felt in years. Back in Los Angeles, things changed in the way things changed when you pretended they hadn't, but both people knew the truth. The working dynamic was the same. The efficiency, the silence, the rhythm of the days. But there were differences that accumulated like rain in a slow flood. His eyes on her now carried a different weight. He began asking her opinions in meetings, not performing inclusion but genuinely wanting to know what she saw. She had a way of reading people, she'd always known it, the kind of observational skill that came from years of watching tables and sensing the difference between a couple on a good night and a couple in crisis. She could read a room. And Jinho, who had built his life on reading rooms, found her instincts occasionally better than his own. He told her this once, bluntly, after a negotiation she'd watched from the corner and debriefed afterward over coffee. "You saw Choi Min-jun's hesitation before I did," he said. "He kept touching his wedding ring when he talked about the partnership timeline," she said. "Means he's worried about something at home affecting his capacity to commit. He's not backing out. He's scared of what committing will cost him personally." Jinho was quiet for a moment. "How do you know that?" "I waited tables for 6 years," she said. "You learn to read people when your income depends on it." He looked at her with that expression she was learning to love, the one where something yielded in his composure just slightly, like a window cracking open. "You are remarkable," he said simply and returned to his papers. She sat with that word for the rest of the afternoon. It was Imani who said it first. "Baby girl," Imani said over the phone on a Thursday evening, while Nicole stood on the 22nd floor watching the city. "You are falling for this man." "He's complicated," Nicole said. "All the good ones are." "He's dangerous, Imani." "Has he been dangerous to you?" Nicole thought about the food allergies, remembered? The apartment with the secure locks. The hand over hers at a dinner table. The kiss in a hallway and the restraint that had followed it. Not coldness, but a man trying very carefully not to take more than she offered. No, she said. He hasn't. Then what are you afraid of? She thought about it. I'm afraid that when this is over, when the 9 months are done and the debt is clear, I will have given him something that I won't get back. Imani was quiet for a moment. Then, honey, that ship has sailed. She found out about her brother by accident. Ethan called her one afternoon in a panic. Someone had approached him at his college job, a man in a suit, asking questions about Nicole, about where she lived, about her routine. Ethan was 20, sharp and frightened. Nicole went to Jinho's office immediately. She had barely begun explaining when his expression shifted in a way she'd never seen, immediate, absolute steel dropping behind his eyes. Describe the man, he said. Ethan had described him in the voicemail. Nicole played it. Jinho listened without moving. Park, he said softly when it ended. The single word carried more weight than she'd ever heard a word carry. He's going after Ethan, she said. Her voice was steady only because she was choosing it. Yes. Jinho was already reaching for the black phone. Because he knows you matter to me. The sentence landed in the room between them, unguarded, unretracted. How does he know that? She asked. Jinho looked at her. Because I have not been as careful as I thought. He paused. Because it is apparently visible. She would have found that devastating and wonderful at any other moment. Right now she was looking at him and saying, Ethan needs to be somewhere safe. I know, he said. I'll handle it. Jinho. Nicole. He crossed to her and his hands closed around her upper arms, not gripping, just contact. I will handle it. Ethan will not be touched. I give you my word. She looked up at him. This man who had bought her debt and her proximity and somewhere along the way had become the place she looked for steadiness. Don't make me promises you can't keep, she said. I have never made a promise I couldn't keep, he said. She believed him. That was the thing. She believed him entirely. Ethan was quietly relocated to a relative's home in Atlanta within 48 hours, done with such smoothness that it looked like a spontaneous family visit. 2 of Jinho's people were stationed nearby. Ethan, told a partial truth, was frustrated but safe. Park Sung-jae escalated. It came in the form of a leak, information fed to a financial journalist that threaded a false narrative connecting Kong International to money laundering. Thin, unprovable, but the kind of story that created enough smoke to require firefighting. 3 investors called in a single morning. Nicole watched Jinho handle it, 12 hours of controlled crisis management, calls stacked, legal team mobilized, counter-narratives drafted. He didn't raise his voice once. He moved through it with the focused, tireless precision she'd come to recognize as his truest self, and by midnight the story was being quietly walked back by the publication's editors under circumstances she didn't ask about. At 1 in the morning he finally sat back in his chair, and for the first time since she'd known him, he looked tired. She brought him coffee. Set it on the desk. He looked at it, then at her. Sit with me, he said quietly. She sat on the couch along the office wall, and he came and sat beside her, not at a professional distance but close, his shoulder against hers. They looked at the dark city together. When I was 22, he said, unprompted, in the quiet way of someone talking into darkness, Park and I started the company from nothing. We were both from families who had complicated histories with money and power. We understood each other. He paused. I had a younger sister. Her name was Jia. Nicole went still. Park borrowed money from people he shouldn't have when the company was struggling. He used Jia as collateral. She didn't know. She was 20 when they came for the debt. He was quiet for a long moment. She's alive. She's in Seoul now. But what happened to her? He stopped. I'm sorry, Nicole said softly. She's the reason, he said. All of this. 2 years of dismantling everything Park built. Leaving him nothing. I wanted him to feel the exposure the way she felt it. The way your mother felt it. He turned to look at her. When I found Grace Collins' name in the portfolio, your name, I thought about Jia. About what it looked like when someone got to a person through the people they loved. Nicole's throat was tight. You protected me from the beginning, she said. I tried, he said. Imperfectly. You bought my debt before I knew your name. You gave me an apartment with locks before I knew to be afraid. She held his gaze. Jinho. That's not imperfect. That's extraordinary. He looked at her with those old, honest eyes and said very quietly, You make me want to be something better than what I've built myself to be. She reached up and pressed her palm against his jaw, and felt him exhale slowly at the contact, closing his eyes for a moment like someone setting something down. You're already better than you think, she said. He turned his face and pressed his lips to her palm. She brought both hands to his face and kissed him then, differently from the first time, more slowly, the way you kissed someone when the urgency had transformed from want into something that needed to be careful with itself. He kissed her back with a tenderness that unmade her completely, one hand in her hair, one at her waist, pulling her close as though proximity was something he'd been disciplining himself away from and had finally been given permission to stop. When they broke apart, his forehead fell to hers again. That gesture, she was realizing, was his specific language for I am here, I am present, this is real. I don't want you to be afraid of what I am, he said. I'm not afraid of you, she said. I was afraid of being used. I was afraid you were a version of every other man who saw my situation and thought leverage. She pulled back slightly to look at him. But you're not, are you? No, he said simply. Then tell me what comes next. With Park. He was quiet for a moment. I have what I need to end it. Financial documentation. Testimony from 3 former associates. I'm meeting with federal investigators next month. After that, Park Sung-jae will be dealing with American prosecutors, not with me. He paused. It ends legally. It ends finally. And then, she said. He looked at her. And then the reason I came to Los Angeles is finished. And I will have a choice about what I stay for. The city burned below them. The rain had stopped. Your debt, he said carefully, will be cleared long before then. You'll be free of any obligation. I want you to know that. I know, she said. I want you to stay, he said. Not because of a contract. Because... He stopped and seemed to find it difficult, this man who moved through rooms like certainty personified. Because I have not wanted anything for myself in 2 years. Everything has been about Park, about Ja, about the work. And then you sat across a table from me and asked for the terms in writing and I... He laughed quietly. It was the first time she'd heard him genuinely laugh, and it was a small, warm, surprised sound that cracked her open. I thought, this woman. This is an extraordinary woman. Jinho, she said. Nicole. Her name in his mouth, with the slight musicality of his accent, had always done something to her. Now it did more. I am asking without leverage, without contract, without anything between us but this. Will you stay? She looked at him, this dangerous, careful, wounded, magnificent man, and thought about her mother and Grace Collins borrowing money in desperation and dying not knowing it would lead her daughter to a rain-soaked night in an office in Los Angeles, falling in love with the man who chose to protect her from across the distance of a ledger sheet. Life was strange and circling, and sometimes it closed loops in ways that made you believe in something larger than coincidence. Yes, she said. He pulled her back to him and held her with a steadiness that felt like a promise kept. And they sat in the amber light with the city stretched below them and the long work of becoming real to each other just beginning. The debt was cleared in month 7. Jinho put the documentation on her desk, a single page with a 0 balance and 2 signatures, and said nothing because with them by then silence had become a language of its own. She looked at it, looked at him, walked around the desk and kissed him in the middle of a Tuesday afternoon, and his arms came around her immediately, the way they always did now. Certain, unhesitating, like coming home. Park Sung-jae was indicted in June. 41 counts across 3 jurisdictions. His network unraveled with the ugly, inevitable speed of things that were always destined to fall. Jinho sat in his office the morning the news broke and was very still and very quiet, and Nicole brought him coffee and sat across from him and let him have the silence until it was finished. Is it enough? She asked after a while. He thought about it honestly. For Jia? Not entirely. Nothing is. But it's what justice looks like in the actual world. He paused. I think I can live with that. She should come visit, Nicole said. I'd like to meet her. Jinho looked at her and his face did the thing she loved, the yielding, the window cracking open. She would like you enormously, he said. Then it's settled. He flew Jia in from Seoul in August. She was 28 and fierce and sharp-eyed and she looked at Nicole for approximately 4 minutes before she said in excellent English, You're the reason my brother smiles again. I have been waiting for you for 10 years. Nicole laughed, startled, and looked at Jinho, who had the grace to look mildly embarrassed. She exaggerates, he said. He does not, Jia said firmly. Ethan met Jinho in September at a dinner Nicole cooked herself in the Wilshire apartment, the one with the view which was hers now entirely with no contract attached. Ethan was 20 and skeptical and protective, and he sat across the table from Jinho with the specific energy of a younger brother conducting an unofficial interview. Jinho submitted to it with complete patience. At the end of the evening, Ethan pulled Nicole aside in the kitchen and said, "He watches you like you're the most important thing in any room you're in." "I know," she said. "And when you were cutting vegetables, he moved the knife block away from the edge of the counter without you noticing." She blinked. She hadn't noticed. "He's still protecting you," Ethan said, quiet and serious. "Even from small things. Even when there's no reason." She looked through the kitchen doorway at Jinho, who was waiting at the table, patient and present. This man who had rebuilt himself for vengeance and found, somewhere in the dismantling, that he wanted something else entirely. "Yeah," she said softly. "He is." She went back to the table and sat beside him, and his hand found hers beneath the table and held it, not strategically, not for any room's benefit, not as armor or advantage. Just because. Later, much later, when the city had gone quiet and Ethan had gone to his hotel and Jia had retired with a glass of wine and a book, Nicole stood at the window looking at Los Angeles the way she'd looked at it that first night, a woman counting her last $20 who could not have imagined what the rain was carrying toward her. Jinho came to stand behind her, his arms sliding around her waist, his chin dropping to her shoulder. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "My mother," she said. "I think she would have liked you." He was quiet for a moment. "I hope so. I would have liked the chance to thank her." "For what?" "For raising someone who walks into difficult rooms and asks for the terms in writing." His arms tightened slightly. "For raising you." Nicole turned in his arms and looked up at him. The man who had been danger and become safety, who had been vengeance and become something that looked, in the amber light of a quiet evening, remarkably like peace. "Jinho," she said. I love you." He looked at her the way she suspected he looked at very few things in the world, without calculation, without armor, just openly, just true. "I love you," he said like it was the simplest fact he knew. "I have been trying not to say it for months." "Why?" "Because when I say things I mean them permanently," he said. "And I wanted to be sure you were ready for permanently." She smiled. Pulled him down by the lapel of his jacket. Kissed him slowly with the whole long future of it, with the weight of everything they'd survived to get here. "I'm ready," she said against his mouth. Outside, Los Angeles hummed and blazed, indifferent and beautiful. Inside, two people who had found each other at the bottom of a ledger sheet held on to the improbable, extraordinary fact of each other. And the night was long and the city was bright, and that was more than enough. Thank you for watching. If you are new here, please subscribe to our channel and click on the notification button to be notified whenever we drop a new story. See you in the next story.